I was looking at a set of photos from a high-profile intervention project in a struggling region. In the first batch, you see these kids surrounded by bright, high-tech educational toys and specialized mentors. The data at the time was incredible. IQ scores were leaping by 10, sometimes 15 points. The researchers were practically glowing. They believed they were witnessing the end of cognitive inequality. It was the ultimate proof of the blank slate. The idea that if you just fix the inputs, the human mind will flourish in whatever direction you point it. To them, these children were clay, and the researchers finally had the right tools to mold them. But then you look at the follow-up data from a decade later. Those same children, now young adults, had settled into a physical and mental reality that looked nothing like those early hopeful charts. The fade-out effect had set in. The miraculous gains hadn't just slowed down, they had evaporated, leaving behind the exact same cognitive distribution the children had at birth. It was as if the intervention had never happened. What's even more unsettling is what happens when we actually achieve the social equality we claim to want. I recently came across a study on the equality paradox in some of the world's most egalitarian societies, places where every child has access to the same elite books, the same health care, and the same teachers. You'd expect the playing field to finally be level. Instead, the opposite happens. The more you equalize the environment, the more internal differences, the genetic ones, take over the driver's seat. In a perfect world, your DNA isn't just a blueprint. It becomes the absolute ceiling. It leaves you wondering why this specific brand of wishful thinking is so fiercely guarded in the ivory tower. We're pouring billions into a theory that the data keeps dismantling, not because the science is sound, but because the alternative feels morally terrifying. It's as if we've decided that for humans to be equal in value, we must first prove they are identical in potential. But as the gap between our social engineering and our biological reality grows, we have to ask, are we actually helping anyone, or are we just protecting a comfortable lie?
Wow. That opening, it really doesn't pull any punches, does it?
Not at all.
It goes straight for the jugular of, well, a lot of modern social theory.
It felt heavy just reading it aloud. I mean, it's deeply uncomfortable territory.
It is.
Because it really challenges the bedrock of what most of us, and I include myself in that, what we want to believe about the world.
Of course. The idea that fairness and equal opportunity should lead to, equal outcomes.
Exactly. We want to believe that if we just treat everyone right, if we fix the system, everyone ends up in roughly the same place. But that text, it basically sets the stage for everything we're diving into today. We are looking right at this friction. It's like these two tectonic plates grinding against each other. On one side, you have our social ideals, fairness, equality, the blank slate.
The world as we wish it was.
And on the other side, you have this cold, hard biological data that's emerging from fields like behavioral genetics and, surprisingly, gigomics.
And that friction, that's exactly where the most interesting and maybe the most disturbing insights are found.
So what's the plan for today? What's our mission?
I think our mission for this deep dive is to try and suspend that wishful thinking just for an hour or so.
Put it on a shelf.
Put it on a shelf.
Yeah.
We need to actually look under the hood at the mechanics of human potential. Not how we wish genes and environment interacted, but how the data. And we're talking about some very extensive and sometimes very controversial sources, how that data suggests they actually interact.
And we have a pretty massive stack of sources today to help us with that.
We do. And we're going to organize this around 3 specific phenomena that really illustrate this friction. First, we're going to look at the equality paradox, specifically how it plays out in STEM fields and social outcomes in, of all places, the most progressive, egalitarian countries on Earth.
Right, the places that are supposed to have it all figured out.
Then we're going to dissect something called the fade-out effect in education, which, well, it explains why those miraculous early gains you talked about in the opening story just disappeared into thin air.
Vanished.
And finally, we're going to look at the collision of genetics with the modern labor market. What happens when our biology meets the raw competitive nature of the digital economy?
And just so you listening know where this is coming from, we're pulling from some pretty hitting papers. There's work on the gender equality paradox in STEM.
Yeah, that's the Osterloh and colleagues paper.
Economic studies on something called polygenic scores and how they relate to wages.
That's Papa George and Tom.
And then these huge meta-analyses of educational interventions from researchers like Bailey and Plowman. So this isn't just, speculation.
No, this is built on decades of data. And look, the goal here isn't to be pessimistic. I have to say that up front.
It's easy to go there, though.
It's very easy to go there. Some of this data feels really bleak when you first encounter it, but the goal is to be realistic. Because if we actually want to help people, if we want to build a society that actually works for human beings...
And you have to know what you're working with.
You have to know what you're working with. You can't build a house if you don't understand the properties of the wood and the stone. You're setting yourself up for failure.
Okay, let's do it. So I want to start with that first story, the equality paradox, because this is the one that really, it just threw me for a loop.
I think it does that to most people.
It feels completely counterintuitive. It seems to defy the basic logic we've all been taught since we were kids.
It takes the standard narrative about progress and equality and just flips it completely on its head.
So to get a handle on this, I want to use a narrative anchor from our source material. Let's talk about a character a young man will call Elias.
Elias is the perfect case study for this. His story makes it real.
So I want you to picture Elias. He's not growing up in some stratified, unequal society with huge gaps between the rich and poor. He's living in what most of us would probably consider a social democratic utopia.
The ideal, right?
The absolute ideal. Think Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. The safety net is incredibly tight. The school lunches aren't just free, they're organic.
Right. Healthcare is universal and top-notch.
His parents have good, stable jobs, but even if they didn't, the state would make sure he has the exact same resources, the same books, the same access to computers as the kid living in the wealthiest mansion next door.
That's the critical part. It's an environment where the inputs, as that opening text called them, are maximized, and maybe more importantly, they're equalized.
The external obstacles have been bulldozed flat.
They're gone.
And Elias himself, he's a grinder. He's doing everything right. He's not slacking off. He's studying late into the night. He's taking advantage of the free state-funded tutors. He's got a stable home life. His dream is to be a physicist.
He's the model student in the model society.
But he keeps hitting a wall. He puts in twice the effort and gets half the results. And he's watching his sister, who grows up in the exact same house, eats the same organic food, goes to the exact same high-quality school.
The environment is identical.
Identical. And she spends half the time he does studying. She's watching TV, she's hanging out with her friends, and yet she seems to just absorb complex calculus by osmosis.
She breezes through.
She breezes through where he is struggling for every single inch.
And in a different world, Elias would have an excuse, wouldn't he?
That's the point. If he were poor, he could say, well, I didn't have the books, or I had to work a job after school. If the schools were bad, he could blame the teachers, the system.
There's always an external factor to point to.
But in this world, in this utopia, where every single environmental variable has been scrubbed clean, Elias has this deeply unsettling realization.
There's nowhere left to hide.
Nowhere. He can't blame the system because the system is perfect. He can't blame his parents' income. He's forced to realize that he has hit the absolute ceiling of his own biological blueprint.
And that realization, that is the equality paradox in a nutshell.
The commentary on this in the sources was just striking. It suggested that when we finally achieve perfect social equality, we don't end up finding sameness. We don't find that everyone creates the same output.
No, far from it.
Instead, we find a world where the only thing left to separate us, the only variable remaining, is our DNA. This feels so cruel, doesn't it?
It does feel cruel.
Like leveling the playing field didn't create equality of outcome. It just made the genetic lottery the absolute tyrannical law of the land.
It feels cruel because we have this deep-seated belief that equal treatment should mean equal outcome. We conflate the two. But let's dig into the mechanics of this, pulling from that Osterloh research.
Okay.
The definition they use is, it's a bit mathematical, but the implication is profound, they say. As environmental variance goes to zero, the heritability of traits increases.
Okay, let's stop there. As environmental variance goes to zero, I just want to make sure I really get this. So we're saying that the more we make life the same for everyone, same schools, same healthcare, same nutrition, the more our genes matter.
That's exactly what it means. Let's use an analogy to make this really stick.
Please.
Okay, imagine we're farmers. We're going to plant a big field of corn. But this isn't a modern, perfect farm. It's a chaotic, old-school field.
A messy, unequal environment.
A very messy, unequal environment. Some parts of the soil are rocky and dry, other parts are rich and loamy. Some spots get full sun all day, others are stuck under the shade of a big oak tree.
It's a lottery where you get planted.
Exactly. Now, we plant 1,000 corn seeds. Some of those seeds have superior genetics. They're programmed by their DNA to be tall and robust. Others have inferior genetics. They're just naturally prone to be shorter.
Okay.
But if you happen to plant one of your superior seeds in that rocky, shady patch, and you plant an inferior seed in the sunny, rich, loamy patch, which one do you think grows taller?
The one in the rich soil, for sure. Yeah. The bad seed in the good soil wins.
It almost certainly wins. Or at the very least, the environment is making so much noise, so much static, that you can't really tell which seed had the better genetics to begin with.
So the environment is the deciding factor.
It's doing most of the heavy lifting. In that situation, the heritability, which is just the amount of the difference in height that's caused by genes, is low.
The noise of the environment is drowning out the genetic signal.
Drowning it out is the perfect phrase. Now, let's build a high-tech greenhouse. This is our Nordic utopia.
This is Elias's world.
This is Elias's world. Inside this greenhouse, every single seed gets the exact same custom-blended nutrient paste, the exact same number of milliliters of water delivered by a computer, the exact same lux of full-spectrum grow light exposure.
The environment is identical for every single plant.
Identical. The environmental variance is 0. Now, when you walk into that greenhouse and look at your 1,000 corn stalks, some are still going to be taller than others. Why?
Because of the seed. There's literally nothing else it could be.
Correct. There's nothing else left to blame. In the greenhouse, the environment explains 0% of the difference in height because the environment is a constant, which means genetics must explain 100% of the difference.
Wow.
By building the perfect greenhouse, by removing poverty, by equalizing schools, we have inadvertently maximized the influence of genetics. We've cleared away all the noise, so now the genetic signal comes through crystal clear.
That puts a completely different spin on what we think of as social justice. It means that the more successful we are at fixing society's problems, the more we're going to be confronted with biological inequality staring us right in the face.
Yes, and you can see how this creates a huge cognitive dissonance for policymakers.
Absolutely.
They're thinking, we did it. We fixed the schools. We fixed healthcare. Why are the test scores still so unequal? And the data is screaming back because you fixed the schools. You removed the environmental dampener that was masking the genetic variance.
And this isn't just about general intelligence or, growing corn. The source material spends a lot of time on how this plays out, specifically with gender, this gender equality paradox in STEM.
Right.
And I feel like this is a topic where people get very defensive very quickly.
It's highly controversial, but the data, when you look at it cross-nationally, is incredibly robust and consistent.
Okay, so the common narrative, the one I hear in the media constantly, is that the reason we don't see a 50-50 split of women and men in fields like physics or engineering is because of barriers.
Right. Structural barriers.
Hidden bias, a lack of role models, the bro culture in tech, you name it. The underlying assumption is that if we could just scrub society clean of sexism, we would naturally arrive at a perfect 50-50 split in every single job.
That is the blank slate assumption applied directly to gender. The idea that men and women are, for all intents and purposes, identical in their interests and aptitudes, and any difference we see is purely a result of social conditioning.
But the Osterloh paper, and also the work by Falk and Hermel, they show something that it completely contradicts that.
It's a direct challenge. They looked at the numbers globally across dozens of countries, and what they found is that in richer, more gender-equal countries, the places you'd expect to be leading the way, like Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, there are significantly fewer female STEM graduates than in less egalitarian, less wealthy countries.
You're telling me that in a country like Algeria, where gender equality scores are much, much lower, women are actually more likely to become engineers than they are in Sweden?
Significantly more likely. The gap is enormous. You look at countries like Algeria or Tunisia or the UAE, and you might see 40 to 50% of STEM graduates are women.
Half.
Almost half. Then you look at the so-called feminist paradises of Scandinavia or Switzerland, and that number drops to 20, maybe 25%.
That seems completely backwards. If Sweden is the country telling girls from birth, you can be anything, why are fewer of them choosing to be engineers? Is it? I mean, is it possible there's just more hidden sexism in Sweden that we're not seeing?
That's always the first argument that critics make, but the researchers have looked at that, and the correlation is so consistent across so many different cultures and economies that it's almost impossible for it to be a fluke of hidden bias.
So there has to be another mechanism at play.
There are two big mechanisms, according to the sources. The first is what Falk and Hermele call the resource hypothesis.
Okay, the resource hypothesis, what is that?
Think about what life is like in a developing nation. The economic safety net is thin, or maybe it doesn't exist at all. If you want to survive, if you want to support your family and have a stable life, you need a job that pays. A tangible, marketable skill.
So you don't have the luxury of finding your passion.
You have to find a paycheck. Engineering, coding, medicine, these are seen as reliable pathways to security.
So economic necessity is the main driver.
It suppresses personal preference. If you are a smart young woman in, say, Morocco, you do the math. I'm good at math, engineering pays well and is a respected profession, therefore I'm becoming an engineer. It's a very pragmatic choice.
But so poverty, in a weird way, acts as an equalizer.
It does. It forces everyone, men and women, toward the most economically viable path, regardless of their intrinsic interests.
But in Sweden?
In Sweden, you have a robust welfare state. You have high wages across most sectors. The raw economic pressure is removed. You know you're not going to starve.
So you have the freedom to choose.
You have the freedom to choose. And that freedom, that wealth, creates the scope for what the researchers call intrinsic preferences to take the wheel.
And this is where that identity cost theory comes in from the text.
When you don't have to do STEM to survive, you start asking yourself a completely different question. It's not what will pay the bills. It's who am I? What do I actually like doing?
And what does the data suggest happens then?
The data suggests that in these wealthy, individualistic societies, gender-differentiated preferences don't disappear. They actually maximize.
So given total freedom and security, men and women, on average, drift further apart in their choices.
On average, yes. The data on interest is very clear. Women, on average, tend to gravitate more toward people-oriented professions, things like psychology, medicine, law, teaching, the humanities.
Working with people.
And men, on average, gravitate more toward things-oriented professions, engineering, mechanics, computer science, systems analysis.
Like working with things.
So when you remove the economic handcuffs that force everyone into the same pragmatic box, people tend to revert to their default settings.
Yeah.
And those settings appear to have, at least in part, a biological or deeply ingrained cultural component.
It's fascinating that the identity cost part suggests that in these wealthy cultures, your job is less about survival and more about your self-expression.
It's part of your identity. And Osterloh makes this brilliant point that in developed nations, the stereotypes can actually become stronger because of this. While if the culture's primary message is be true to yourself and your internal self doesn't align with the cultural stereotype of a coder who sits in a dark room all day,
You opt out.
you opt out. Because choosing that career would have a high identity cost. It wouldn't feel authentic. Paradoxically, the very freedom to choose leads to more stereotypically divergent choices.
Which leads to this idea of an equal but different norm.
Right. The sources argue we've shifted from what they call vertical gender norms
The idea that men are just better than women.
to horizontal norms, which is the idea that men and women are equal in value and ability, but are, on average, interested in different things.
So the implication here, and this is where it gets really uncomfortable again, is that the equality paradox creates a new, very rigid form of stratification.
So,
Well, if you can't fix the environment any further, if everyone truly have the choice and the resources, then the outcome you see is the outcome. You can't social engineer your way out of preferences that might be deeply rooted in our biology.
and that is a very hard pill to swallow for anyone whose ideology is built on the idea that equality must mean sameness of outcome in all fields.
It suggests that true diversity and true equality of opportunity might actually work against our goal of sameness of outcome. But okay, this brings us to the second pillar of our deep dive.
Right.
If the equality paradox is about what happens when you perfect the environment and genetics takes over, we also have to talk about what happens when we try to actively fix the individual and biology pushes back.
Yes, the dreaded fade-out effect.
The fade-out effect. And I want to go back to that source material narrative about the intervention program. We're calling the subject Maya. I think it's important to really paint the picture of what happened to her, because it's not just a data point on a chart. It's a tragedy of, good intentions and dashed expectations.
So tell us about Maya.
Okay, so imagine Maya is a little girl, maybe 4 years old, living in a struggling urban district back in the late 90s. The government, full of optimism, launches this massive high-intensity intervention program We're talking the full kitchen sink approach.
They're throwing everything they can possibly think of at her, and kids like her.
Everything. She gets daily one-on-one coaching. She gets nutritional supplements to make sure her brain development is optimal. She has these highly trained mentors visiting her home, working with her on pre-reading skills. Her parents get training on how to be better parents. It is an all-out assault on her environment.
And what were the initial results?
Miraculous. At age 5 or 6, the data looks like a dream come true. Maya is the star student. Her IQ scores have jumped by 15 points. She's reading way above her grade level. The researchers are high-fiving each other. They're publishing papers. They're on the news. They genuinely believe they've cracked the code.
They thought they had molded the clay, just like in the opening text.
They were sure of it. They believed they had permanently rewritten her destiny. But then the program ends. The funding cycle closes. The researchers move on. Maya goes to a regular elementary school, then a regular middle school. She grows up.
And the follow-up data comes in.
And the follow-up data, the charts from 10 years later, show this slow, heartbreaking slide. As soon as the scaffolding of the program was removed, her scores began to drift downwards. By the time she's in her late teens, she's right back where she started. Her IQ is back to its original baseline. The gap between her and the control group, who got no intervention, had completely vanished.
It's just devastating. All that effort, all that money, all that hope, and the end result is nothing, as if it never happened.
It's like it never happened. I was thinking about it with this analogy of an exoskeleton.
Okay.
It's like the program gave her this high-tech robotic suit that allowed her to run at 30 miles per hour. And while she was wearing it, she was a superstar. But the suit didn't actually change her underlying muscles. It didn't change her physiology.
It was an external support system.
Exactly. So the moment they took the suit off, she went back to running exactly as fast as she was biologically programmed to run.
That is a very, very apt analogy for the fade-out effect. And it's crucial to understand this isn't just one study about Maya. We see this pattern again and again in the Bailey et al. Meta-analysis of educational interventions.
So this is a consistent finding.
It's one of the most consistent and frustrating findings in all of social science. You see these high initial impacts, like in a program called the Building Blocks Math Intervention. Kids shoot ahead. But then over time, one of two things happens. Either the control group just naturally catches up, or the treatment group actually regresses back to their mean. The end result is the same. The effect fades out.
But why? That's the part I really struggle with. If you teach a kid to read early, shouldn't that knowledge compound? Shouldn't they become a better reader, which makes them better at history, which makes them smarter and smarter? Why does it just fade?
It feels like it should compound, like interest in a bank account. It's a very logical assumption. But the sources point to two very powerful mechanisms that work against it. The first is what they call the washout effect.
The washout effect, okay.
Think of your life as a long timeline, and along that timeline, you experience a series of random environmental shocks.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. So maybe in 3rd grade, you get a brilliant, inspiring teacher. That's a big positive shock. But in 4th grade, you get the flu and miss 2 weeks of school. That's a negative shock. In 5th grade, your parents go through a messy divorce, a big negative shock. In 6th grade, you discover a book series you love, a positive shock.
So life is just a series of random hits and misses.
Yes, and over a long enough timeline, for most people, these random environmental shocks tend to cancel each other out. The good look and the bad look average out to roughly 0.
And when all that environmental noise cancels out, what's left?
The constant, the signal that never changes, your DNA. The theory is that as we age, we regress to our long-term genetic mean. The early intervention was just one big positive shock at the beginning of the timeline, but it gets washed out by all the subsequent random events of life.
So the older we get, the more the noise of life settles down, and the more our fundamental us comes through.
Biologically speaking, that's exactly right. And this is a fascinating finding in itself. The heritability of intelligence actually increases with age.
It goes up, not down.
It goes up. In infancy, genes explain very little about cognitive differences because babies are almost entirely dependent on the environment their parents create. But by the time you're an adult, genes explain a massive amount of the variance.
Wow.
And this leads directly to the second and maybe more complex mechanism, which the researcher Robert Plumman talks about a lot. It's called active gene-environment correlation.
Active gene-environment correlation, that's a mouthful.
But the concept is actually pretty intuitive, and it's crucial. It completely challenges the old idea that the environment is just something that happens to you, like the weather.
We're not just passive recipients.
Plumman's point is that as we age, we gain autonomy. we start to select our own environments. And this is the key. We select environments that match and amplify our genetic predispositions.
Can you break that down? Give me an example of a kid selecting their environment.
Sure. Let's take a child, we'll call him Leo, who has a high genetic propensity for verbal processing. He just naturally enjoys words. His brain is wired that way. Even if his parents don't force him into some intensive reading program, what does he do when he has free time?
He's going to pick up a book or a comic book. He'll talk to adults. He'll listen to podcasts.
Exactly. He seeks out word-rich environments. He goes to the library, not because his mom is dragging him there, but because his brain literally craves that kind of input. He is actively constructing an environment for himself that reinforces his genetic strength. Now let's take another child, one who struggles with verbal processing, but has a really high genetic propensity for, say, spatial reasoning and physical coordination.
They're going to be outside on the soccer field or building with Legos.
Now, even if you took that athletic kid and put him in Maya's intensive reading program at age 4, even if you force that environment on him and see a temporary boost, what happens once the program ends? Once he has a choice about how to spend his Saturday afternoon, is he going to the library?
No. He's going outside to kick a ball.
He stops maintaining the scaffolding. He chooses the environment that feels natural and rewarding to him. So the exoskeleton falls away because the child isn't actively choosing to keep it on. The intervention only works for as long as it is constantly and externally applied.
That makes a lot of sense, but it's also incredibly frustrating. It implies that we can't really change a child's long-term trajectory unless we're willing to police their environment 24/7 forever.
To some extent, yes. And this connects directly to what the researcher David Bailey calls the trifecta skill problem. He argues that for an intervention to have a lasting effect, to avoid this fade out, it has to target a skill that meets 3 very specific criteria. 1, it has to be malleable, meaning you can actually change it. 2, it has to be fundamental, meaning it's a building block for other skills. And 3,
that third one seems like it's going to be the kicker.
The third one is the absolute kicker. The skill is something that wouldn't develop otherwise.
Wouldn't develop otherwise.
That's the one. And it perfectly explains the catch-up phenomenon we see in these studies. Let's take a skill like basic reading or counting. In a modern society like ours, these are what you might call species-typical behaviors.
Meaning almost everyone learns them eventually.
Right. It's really hard to get through modern life without learning to read at a basic level. Even in a mediocre school, most kids get there by age 7 or 8. So, if you intervene with Maya at age 4 and drill her on her letters and numbers, you speed up that process. She learns to read at 4 instead of 6. At age 5, you look at the data and you see this huge gap between her and the control group. You declare victory.
But you're just looking at a snapshot in time.
Exactly. Fast forward to age 8. The control group has now also learned to read. They caught up.
So the intervention didn't make Maya fundamentally smarter. It just made her early.
You've got it. The advantage wasn't a permanent boost in her cognitive processing power. It was a temporary shift in the timing of her development. And because reading is a skill that would have developed otherwise, the initial intervention essentially becomes redundant over time.
So is it all hopeless then? I mean, we always hear about the Perry Preschool Project as the gold standard of early intervention. Did everything fade out there too?
No, and this is a really vital nuance if we want to salvage some optimism from this. The sources, especially the work by the economist James Heckman, point out something fascinating about Perry. While the IQ gains in the Perry Preschool Project did fade out, the cognitive fade-out was very real.
So they didn't end up with higher IQs?
They did not. But the life outcomes for the Perry kids improved significantly and permanently.
Wait, how is that possible? How can you have fade-out in IQ but a permanent improvement in life? If they aren't any smarter, why are they doing better?
Because smarts, as measured by an IQ test, isn't the only thing that matters for a successful life. The Perry kids, decades later, had lower crime rates, higher employment, higher incomes, better health.
So what was it then? What stuck?
The leading theory is that the intervention didn't permanently boost their raw intelligence, what psychologists call the G factor, but it did permanently boost their non-cognitive skills.
You mean things like grit or conscientiousness?
Impulse control, the ability to sit still and pay attention in class, the ability to defer gratification. These might be the fundamental skills that actually stick.
So you're saying maybe you can't increase a child's raw processing speed. That's the hardware. but maybe you can install better software for managing their emotions and behavior.
The exoskeleton falls off the IQ, but maybe they learned the simple habit of showing up on time and being polite, and that habit stayed with them for life.
And that alone is enough to change their life trajectory.
For many of them, it seems to have been, and in many ways, that's a huge win. But it forces us to abandon that core blank slate idea that we can raise everyone's IQ to genius levels if we just buy them the right educational toys. We can't IQ train our way out of inequality.
Which leads us directly into the lion's den, because if we accept that these cognitive differences are persistent and that they're significantly genetic and that our best efforts to engineer them away often fail, then we have to look at where those differences matter most.
And today, right now, in our economy.
That's the modern digital labor market.
This is the third part of our story where the rubber really meets the road. We're moving from the classroom, from poor Maya and her fading test scores, into the adult world of work. And the context here is terrifyingly competitive.
We're looking at the intersection of behavioral genetics and the digital economy. This is what we've called Story 3 in our outline. And to really understand this, we need to dive into that Papa George and Tom paper on polygenic scores.
Okay, let's demystify that term first. Polygenic score. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi dystopia.
Is this like that movie Gattaca? A blood test that tells you if you're going to be rich?
It's not quite that deterministic, but it's heading in that direction. A polygenic score is a statistical tool. It's often called an EA score, which stands for Educational Attainment Score. What researchers do is they look at your DNA, not just one gene, but thousands of tiny variations across your whole genome called SNPs. And they find statistical correlations between these patterns of SNPs and a real-world outcome, like how many years of schooling a person completes.
So it's a number derived from your DNA that predicts your likelihood of graduating from college.
Your likelihood, exactly. It's not a destiny, it's a probability. But it's not really about school, is it? It's a proxy for something else.
Right. The score is really just capturing a whole bundle of heritable traits that are useful in a classroom. Things like cognitive processing speed, abstract reasoning, working memory, maybe even some personality traits like conscientiousness or patience.
It's like a genetic report card on your academic potential.
So what does the data say about this genetic score and, well, money?
The trend is unmistakable and, frankly, a bit alarming. The genetic gradient in wages has grown significantly in recent cohorts.
Okay, genetic gradient in wages, in plain English.
It means that your genes predict your income more today than they did 50 years ago.
So my DNA is more important to my paycheck in the year 2026 than it would have been for my grandfather in 1970.
Much more important. And the reason for this is a huge economic shift that economists call skill-biased technological change.
Let's break that down. I think an analogy would help here.
Okay. Think about an agricultural society or even an early industrial one. Let's say you're working on a Ford assembly line in 1950. Your job all day is to tighten one specific bolt on a wheel as it goes by.
Okay. Repetitive, simple. I can do that.
Now imagine you are a secret genius. You have incredible abstract reasoning skills, a photographic memory. Can you tighten that one bolt significantly faster or better than a guy with average intelligence standing next to you?
Probably not. There's a physical limit to how fast you can turn a wrench. The job itself is the bottleneck.
The difference in economic output between the genius and the average person on that assembly line is negligible. The technology of the time the wrench doesn't allow the genius to leverage their cognitive advantage.
So the genetic ceiling doesn't matter much because the job itself imposes a much lower ceiling.
Right. But now, introduce the computer. Introduce the internet, AI, the digital economy. In this new skill-biased economy, the most valuable skills are not physical strength or the ability to follow simple instructions.
It's cognitive traits.
It's cognitive traits, abstract reasoning, the ability to learn new software quickly, complex problem-solving, creativity.
So the computer doesn't just replace the worker. It amplifies the worker.
It amplifies the high-ability worker. This is the crucial interaction effect that they found in the source data. The polygenic score, that genetic potential, predicts higher wages primarily for people who have a college education and are working in these complex technical fields.
Technology acts as a multiplier for innate ability.
A massive multiplier. I think you had an analogy in your notes about racing. It fits perfectly.
Right. So imagine you have two race car drivers. One is just naturally a tiny bit better than the other, slightly better reflexes, better instincts. That's the small innate genetic gap. If you put both of them on identical bicycles and have them race, The better driver might win, but only by a few seconds. The technology, the bicycle, is limited. It doesn't allow for much variance in the outcome.
The gap in skill doesn't translate to a big gap in performance.
But if you take those same two drivers and put them in Formula One cars,
The game changes completely.
that Formula One car amplifies that tiny, tiny difference in reflexes into a massive difference in performance. The better driver doesn't just win by a few seconds, they lap the other guy 10 times. The technology magnifies the innate skill gap into a chasm.
And our modern economy is essentially handing out Formula One cars to people who have the genetic reflexes to handle them.
And it's paying them exponential rewards for driving them well. That's why we see this wage gap exploding at the very top end. It's not just education in a vacuum, it's the interaction of education, technology, and high genetic potential.
It's a three-way interaction.
But there's a dark side to this, right? The unrealized potential part of the study. This is the part that, when I read it, it just made me angry.
Yes. This is what Papa George and Tom call the class gene conflict. And it really is a modern tragedy.
They found that there are lost Einsteins out there.
What they found specifically is that high genetic score children, kids who have that innate Formula One potential, who are born into low socioeconomic status families, are less likely to finish college than low-score children from high SES families.
That is just infuriating. So you're saying the dumb rich kid gets the degree and gets handed the keys to the race car, while the smart poor kid gets left behind on the bicycle.
Statistically, that is what is happening. And in our current economy, that college degree is the entry ticket. It's the key to the garage where they keep the Formula One cars. You can't even get a chance to prove your skill without it.
So we have this massive, tragic waste of unrealized human potential.
A huge waste. The market wants to reward these high-potential poor kids. It has a massive wage premium waiting for them if they can just get in the door, but poverty blocks their entry ticket.
This seems like the absolute slam dunk argument for things like free college or universal access to higher education. We have to get those smart poor kids into the cars. If we just do that, we solve the problem.
It is the single best argument for improving access. But, and here's the brutal twist that brings us right back to the equality paradox where we started this whole conversation.
Oh no, I have a feeling I'm not going to like where this is going.
If we do it, if we succeed in fixing the access issue, if we ensure that every high potential kid, regardless of their parents' income, gets a degree and a shot at the race car, what have we actually done?
We've made the system perfectly fair.
We have perfected the meritocracy. We have removed the last major environmental barrier class that was blocking the full expression of genetic potential.
And so we unleash the full, unmitigated force of genetic stratification.
Exactly. Once you've eliminated the waste of unrealized potential, you are left with a system where economic survival and success are tied almost exclusively to genetic luck. You create a pure digital meritocracy, where your station in life is determined, in large part, by your brain's processing speed and your ability to solve non-routine problems.
And you can't redistribute processing speed.
You cannot.
You can redistribute money, you can redistribute land, but you can't take neurons from one person and give them to another.
No. The digital labor market becomes the ultimate environment for the expression of genetic variance. It becomes the most fair system imaginable in terms of opportunity, and perhaps the most brutal and stratified system imaginable in terms of outcome.
This is, man, it's heavy. It all comes back to Elias, doesn't it? Elias in his Nordic utopia, hitting that invisible ceiling. He isn't a relic of the past. He's the future of the global labor market.
He is. He's the canary in the coal mine. He shows us what happens when you strip away all the excuses and you're left with just the raw material of who you are.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize all of this. We've been on quite a journey here.
We have. It's a lot to process.
We started with the hope of the blank slate, right? The bright toys, the optimism that we could mold children like clay.
The dream of perfect malleability.
Then we saw that hope just dissolve in the face of the fade-out effect, which showed us that you can't just scaffold intelligence forever, that biology have a long memory.
Biology pushes back.
Then we looked at the equality paradox with Elias and realized that perfecting the environment doesn't create sameness. It just reveals the genetic ceiling in stark relief.
It amplifies the genetic signal.
And finally, we see that our entire modern tech-driven economy is becoming a machine perfectly designed to seek out and pay a massive premium for that lucky ticket in the genetic lottery.
It's a collision course. The fundamental tension is between our deep moral desire for sameness, our belief that for people to have equal worth, they must have equal outcomes, and the biological reality of variance. People are different. deeply, inherently different.
Which brings us right back to that question from the ivory tower. The text we read at the very beginning asked why this wishful thinking, this blank slate idea, is so fiercely guarded. Why do we cling to it?
I think we cling to it because the alternative is morally terrifying. If we admit the blank slate is a myth, we have to fundamentally rethink our entire concept of justice.
Because our current concept of justice is based on that promise, right? If you just work hard, you can be anything. That's the American dream. That's the promise we make to our children.
But if being anything depends heavily on a biological roll of the dice that happened before you were even born, if the Formula One driver wins largely because of reflexes he didn't earn, then hard work is no longer the only variable in the equation, and that's a very uncomfortable truth.
So what is the new question we have to ask? If we can't promise sameness of outcome, what can we promise?
I think the new question is, how do we define justice and dignity in a world where we acknowledge that people are not potential clones of one another? Justice can no longer be defined as everyone ends up in the same place. It has to be defined in a world where we accept unequal potential, but still demand equal dignity.
So we have to build a society that values the Honda Civic driver just as much as it values the Formula One driver.
Even if the market doesn't. And that is the profound social and political challenge of the next century.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with this final thought, something that has been rattling around in my head since we started this deep dive. If the data tells us that the more we equalize the world, the more our DNA dictates our destiny, then we are heading toward a future where our social hierarchy isn't based on money or class or privilege, but on the very code written into our cells. In a truly perfect meritocracy, there is no one left to blame for your station but yourself. And perhaps that is the most terrifying inequality of all. This has been The Deep Dive.